Shadiversity has had a lot of ill takes recently. One of the most hilarious posts that Shad had made recently was him saying that Studio Ghibli was plain and uninspired. He showed these two pictures, one which was a random still shot from Princess Mononoke, a Studio Ghibli film, and then the other shot was an AI-generated image, and he said that, that was objectively better than the image that was made by Studio Ghibli.
I think to a very objective person, if you're just going to compare, which I was doing, compare the art styles, the old Miyazaki art style to that one, I think it's pretty clear that one image is superior in terms of overall quality.
The funny part about this is he had purposely chosen a very boring frame from Princess Mononoke, and then the AI image was obviously, a more dynamic pose, so it wasn't even like comparing apples to apples. To me, what's really funny about Shad saying that Studio Ghibli is plain and uninspired is he seems to be really convinced that he has a lot of artistic prowess.
This is the dressing you does good.
Easily at professional standard.
Yes.
So you might be wondering, well, hey JJ, how good of an artist is Shadiversity exactly? Maybe he does have a leg to stand on with regards to calling Studio Ghibli, plain and uninspired. Alright, well here's Shadiversity's drawing then. Just look at that face. This cursed smile is gonna haunt me in my sleep. But don't look at those thighs though, because they are extremely thick, and the body of this girl is also pretty petite, like I'm pretty sure she's 13 or 15. Now, I'm not the guy who's just going to make fun of everybody's funny portfolios that I'm going to find on Instagram or Twitter or whatever, because, let's be honest, it's hard to draw something that's really good and inspired. Now, the only reason why I'm bringing this up with Shad is because he has, this level of arrogance where he thinks that Studio Ghibli is plain and uninspired, like there's nothing to it. And then he also is very presumptuous and very certain that he is at the level of a professional artist. But even more hilarious than this drawing is the essay of a tweet that Shadiversity made to explain why he is extremely proud of this drawing that he had illustrated not really, because AI actually kind of helped him. Anyway, let me read the tweet. I've been watching a lot of isekai anime lately. Solo Leveling is the best, and it put me in the mood to illustrate an anime-style fantasy adventurer. And I had a lot of fun with working with an animated style with bigger eyes. My favorite parts are her smile and expression, which I need to shape manually, as with everything else in this image, but the smile took the most work. I put extra effort into the background of this one. I love her sword and shield and armor, which I designed myself, which shouldn't need to be said, but people just assume that AI does all the work when it's quite the opposite with how I make my images. I literally made a 3D model for that sword, and I love its design. I think I'll illustrate a companion for her and add him to the image. After complaining that Studio Ghibli is plain and uninspired, this is what Shad cooked up, and he's bragging about it. Shadiversity is bragging about that smile and the expression. So a lot of people were saying that Shadiversity went full mask off when he claimed that this AI image was better than Studio Ghibli simply because it had more detail, when everybody knows that's not what makes something good art. Art isn't supposed to be a one-for-one reality. A few weeks ago, Graham Nolan, the co-creator of Bane, the villain who snapped Batman's back, came on my show and explained very succinctly how art isn't supposed to be a one-for-one to reality.
For the example that I like to use is, when Charles Schultz draws a beagle on top of a doghouse, it's very unique. You can't replicate that. And now you can tell AI to draw a beagle on a doghouse, and it's going to be this sterile thing that might look like a real beagle on a real doghouse, and it'd be kind of funny and weird looking, but it doesn't have the charm of Charles Schultz's pen. But we live in real life, so right. As entertainment, why do you want to? You can look out the window for real life.
Yes.
For entertainment, you want something larger than life, something maybe more exciting or more interesting than what's going on in your own life.
And Shadiversity was convinced that this AI image was significantly better than Studio Ghibli simply because it had more detail. He thinks that the more detail something has, the more realistic it is, it's automatically better. And the funny part is this pose that the AI Studio Ghibli version had was also more dynamic. So he's, cherry picking a very boring scene from the movie and comparing it to a more dynamic pose. So it's not really an apples to apples comparison. Now this is really when Shadiversity just went full mask off. Him claiming that Studio Ghibli is plain and uninspired is just one of the most ridiculous things I've heard. I'm not even saying that you have to like Studio Ghibli. I'm not a fan of Snow White, but I recognize that Snow White is very beautiful art and it's very impressive animation. But Shad doesn't really see this as a subjective issue. He sees it as a very objective one. Again, him claiming that Studio Ghibli is plain and uninspired was him going full mask off. Now, this recent post he made of this girl, this teenage girl with very thick thighs and a demonic smile, this is him going full pants off. You know, you didn't think he could get any lower than that. But after trashing Miyazaki, you know, and him thinking that he's drawing at a professional level, he goes ahead and posts this. Now, this post is no longer available on Twitter. I really do think that Shadiversity is finally gaining some self-awareness. I'm not saying that Shad actually is aware that this is a really horrible image, that he shouldn't be proud of it. I think that there's actually another reason, but still nonetheless, I think it's good that he's moving in the right direction, and he's starting to realize that, you know, he isn't the greatest thing since sliced bread. So if I was to guess why Shad had actually ended up deleting this post, I think it has more to do with what I mentioned earlier about this girl looking almost like she's 13 when you look at the frame of her body, her height, but then her thighs are extremely thick, so it kind of looks like he's sort of fetishizing what would be a teenager. I'm not the only guy who felt a little uncomfortable with this image. There was this commenter here too who said the following. This guy called Hot Grapes Comics said it's just her thighs are huge while the rest of her is very petite. Now he didn't directly say this, but what he was kind of trying to say is this looks like this is a really young girl with massive thick thighs. That's not very appropriate. Now, a lot of people have also been pretty uncomfortable with Shadiversity's book, which many also felt was, you know, sexualizing minors. You know, the protagonist, he'd actually basically violated over 400 or maybe it was 500 teenage girls. And it was supposed to be sort of like a redemption story. A lot of people feel that wasn't really executed very well. I think that's probably why Shadiversity ended up deleting this post, but I can't say for sure. Regardless, though, it is a sign that he's kind of gaining some self-awareness. I wish he'd also realized that he is not drawing at all at a professional level. But at the same time, I also kind of enjoy it because it's pretty entertaining to see someone take himself that seriously. At the same time, just go ahead and bash one of, you know, the most important studios in terms of animation. Shadiversity isn't the only person to delete one of his cell phones. The Critical Drinker also, he recently just had this very massive L. A lot of people were very critical of his film, Rogue Elements. In fact, I would say most people, almost everybody who saw it, just realized it was ridiculous, it was woke garbage, and they recognized that even for being an indie film, it still was horrible. I have seen many indie films that were actually good, you know, low-budget Star Wars films where I go, okay, now I know you didn't really have any money, but still, this was good. So the Critical Drinker, who's supposedly, you know, this base Chad, who's always telling the truth and speaking honestly, he couldn't take an ounce of this criticism. He said that the reason why his movie was bad had nothing to do with him or his script, but it was actually because the actor wasn't able to read the script, so it had to be altered. And he also went on to blame his audience, you know, claiming that they weren't smart enough to grasp a film that was profound, that was groundbreaking, which is why he just had to make it simple.
The other big criticism is that the script writing is just bad and unoriginal, like any other generic action thriller story. And this is actually an interesting one because it gets right to the heart of what we decided to do with this movie. Yes, we absolutely could have produced some crazy experimental piece of surreal existentialism that 90% of the audience wouldn't even understand or have any interest in, but when you're taking your first shot at something like this, and more importantly you're spending other people's money to do it, you're very much aware of the pressure and expectation that's on you.
Now, a lot of people picked up on this. There was, for example, this bread tuber over here who's called Edgier Than Thou, and just a little bit later, it was probably a day or two later, he actually ended up taking the video down. This was documented by Yapoizak over here with this video. So this was April 4th, and this was a little after he'd taken the video down. Now, this guy, Edgier Than Thou, who I think is a bread tuber, he actually was kind enough to send me this whole Cope video, which he had archived. And so then I went ahead and I sent that to Ethan Van Sciver, who ended up playing that on Trashcast on April 8th. Now, magically, a day later, the Critical Drinker, after Ethan Van Sciver, you know, played his Cope video and said he was going to watch his movie, all of a sudden, the Critical Drinker uploads the video a second time, this time putting it on his smaller channel, that way less people would see it, but also it would go directly to his most ardent supporters, right? The people who subscribe to a YouTuber's second channel are always going to be their most loyal followers, so if you post something there, they're way less likely to criticize it because they sort of, you know, really endear the creator there. So he knew that he was basically putting it in a hug box. And he was only putting it there because he was getting eviscerated by people like Ethan Van Sciver. You know, Ethan basically owns all of these people. He's got all of them on a very tight leash. And it's really funny to see. Which of these two hilarious cell phones do you find the most entertaining? Shadiversity's post about his art, or Critical Drinker's Cope video where he was just attacking his fans? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, or...
You are a hoe ass.